Hi, thanks everyone. So I'm just going to dive right in and get going. If I was to point out one common theme in all of my work throughout my entire artistic practice, I'd say it would be about how the idea of the self relates to the outside world. I'm interested in the intersection between the singular, private, inner space of the individual and the shared exterior space, how one affects the perception and the manifestation of the other. The work that I create explores the tension between what we hide and what we expose, what's public and what's private, what's socially acceptable and what's taboo, what's attractive and what's repulsive, through theoretical frameworks, social psychology, and historical and contemporary artistic precedents. So today I'd like to speak to you about the work that I've completed exploring social performances around food-based celebrations. I'm going to show you works that I've created over the last 5 years that led me up to the Cafeteria exhibition. Each of the suites of work is around an ephemeral food-based ritual. One of them's a candlelit dinner for two. One of them's a girls' night dinner party. One of them's a family lunch, and one of them's a wake. I'm interested in food as a catalyst for performed behavior. It's through the lens of the guest's behavior, particularly the adoption of different persona, that I investigate portraiture and the social role of feasting and drinking. We're compelled to eat together. We use food as celebration, as mourning, as comfort, as fuel. Religious holiday, we eat. First date, we eat. Funeral, we eat. Eating brings us together. It's disarming. Food is an animator. It's tied to social expectations around how to act, what to eat, what not to eat, when and where, how and with whom. So in preparing for this show with Elvira, one of the things that I did was to read a book called The Rituals of Dinner by Margaret Visser. And she talked about how rituals around eating have been developed because eating is such a base and often grotesque daily activity. I just wanted to read one quote from her book that really influenced me in the project downstairs. In ritual behavior, the how, as well as the what of the matter, have been laid down in advance. The individual performs, but the group's conventions have decided the sequence, the spatial layout, and the manner. Table manners are rituals because they're the way in which it is commonly agreed that eating should be performed. So this points to what interests me, the collective agreed upon ritual and the personal performances that make that ritual happen, punctuated by little moments that break from performing, even for a second. So, open my little tray up here. Here we go. That leads me to the first piece. This is Meredith's 31st birthday. You're looking at the final work, which is a polyiptych, 4 panels, oil on mylar, mounted to board. The whole installation's about 10 feet by 3 feet, and it was done in 2013. There's many pieces that lead up to this work, pieces that you don't see, pieces that you would see, like what's downstairs. But that's usually something that's hidden. The ritual of the dinner party. This is what I was really into with this idea of Meredith's birthday. This was an actual birthday party that I showed up to and hijacked for my own art-making purposes. I felt like at 31, my friend Meredith, perhaps we were acting a little bit like grown-ups. We felt that we should be grown-ups. It's a 31st birthday. We're going to have a dinner party. I thought that it was a gesture that was about class and it was about aging beauty. This is the panel of Lonnie. What I decided to do when I looked at all of the images was to create 4 portraits. So a portrait for each of the guests who are present. And each person acted differently within the dinner party, and I wanted to try to capture that in some way. So Lonnie, in the image that's most in the foreground, she's laughing and she's interacting, but the subsequent 3 images are of her retreating, and she's a much more private person and didn't know the group as well as the rest of us. This is Meredith, the birthday girl. She's exuberant. She's having so much fun. You can see here that perhaps the dinner party is more about drinking than it is about eating. There's much more glassware than there is any food on the dinner table. And we're having a good time. This is me, and I wanted to draw attention to the foreground, and that's an element that I superimposed onto the images. They're peonies, and what I love about peonies is how gorgeous they are. They're so beautiful when they're perfectly in bloom, and that moment is really fleeting, and then immediately they start falling apart. So these are peonies just when they start falling apart a little bit. And finally, this is Ainsley, and she's really retreating more than most of us, and you might recognize this image from images that were used in the promotion of Cafeteria. So despite the high levels of ritual around each eating occasion, participants are still left unintentionally exposed. I'm interested in these moments of slippage. I aim to create messy, unflattering, fun, honest depictions of people experiencing joy and celebration, or contemplation and anxiety. So that brings me to the next suite of works. These are Brendan eating. This was the candlelit dinner for two. My husband Brendan and I had an intimate candlelit dinner in my studio, again with images taken in this time-lapse way. The images showed Brendan eating. They were taken from the perspective, my perspective, sitting at the table. They had the full range of what was being eaten, all of the dinnerware, all of the surroundings. But what interested me when I looked at the photographs were these moments where the camera caught Brendan in an inward second. So not making eye contact, not looking at the camera, not looking at the food, retreating privately. I like this idea of the guest being in a vulnerable and self-involved moment of eating and enjoying food. And these moments really reveal a suspension in social acting. So, like I say, the guest not interacting publicly and instead is retreating privately. There's 4 paintings in total. Did I say this? They're oil and mylar, 12 by 18 inches and done in 2012. I was also interested in eliminating all of the elements that related to food or drinking and making it a very ambiguous moment. So food is so much about pleasure and so much about enjoyment, and with this being my romantic partner, I decided to take the liberty of having it be a slippage between what could be happening. Is it a moment of passion or is it a moment of enjoying food? In preparing to start all of the work involving food, I did quite a bit of research around historical and contemporary painting involving celebrations around food. There's so much of it. It appears so much throughout art history. In particular, I developed an interest in Dutch 17th century genre paintings of merrymaking. So this is a great example right here. This is Frans Hal's Merrymakers of Shrovetide from 1617. I love the dense composition. There's literally no negative space in this composition. There's so many figures. They're all eating or dancing or singing. They're all real caricatures, very unflattering, a real moment about excess and enjoyment. This is another Frans Hal's image. It's officers of the St. George Civic Guard Haarlem from 1616. I really like the composition in this piece and how the uniform creates a sort of sameness throughout the whole thing, and the heads become like a rhythmic way that we look around the table. And you'll see that I actually rely on this compositional device in my own work coming up. This is Jan Steen, The Way You Hear It is the Way You Sing It, which is a fabulous title, I think, from 1665. A lot of these images, this is another Jan Steen image called The Merry Family from 1668. A lot of these images were created as a kind of parody of lower class people and a comment on excess and too much enjoyment, perhaps. This is my nod to Elvira. This is Peter Klaus. So I also love the 17th century memento mori still life painting, and that idea that painting The food after it's been enjoyed and in a state of decay points to the ephemeral and reminds us all that we're mortal, essentially. So skipping wildly into the 21st century, I'm thinking about John Curran. This is Thanksgiving from 2002. He's a contemporary painter out of New York who really loves poking fun at everyone, loves to make the art world mad, but he's done some beautiful images around eating and feasting. This one is also John Curran, called Stamford After Brunch from 2000. Perhaps a social commentary on the idea of the housewife. Like I say, loves making people mad. This is Nicole Eisenman, and she did this fabulous series of beer gardens from Queens, New York, where she lives. And this is called Beer Garden with Ash from 2009. You can see that she is obviously also really influenced by those Dutch 17th century images of merrymaking with her density and composition. This is Beer Gardens and Night from 2007. So the work that I feel that I've created that responds most directly to the kind of research I've done is called Wood Family Matriarchy. It's oil on mylar, 4 feet by 2 feet from 2012. I had gotten a residency out at Deep Bay, Clear Lake, and had asked my mom and my aunt and my cousin to all come up and have lunch with me because we used to vacation out there, so tying it into the place. I wanted to have a real dense composition. I decided to have multiple figures of each person, tried to capture the idea of different persona around the table. The front left, making sure that you guys are seeing the same thing I'm seeing. The front left is myself, and behind me is my mom. Across the table is her twin sister, and then my cousin. So there's this definite idea of mirroring, and in some of the close-ups you can see that my cousin and I are marching towards our mothers in a way that perhaps speaks about aging and our own mortality. So the last thing I wanted to speak to you about was the idea of surveillance and the gaze. So in order to create all of these artworks, I've used a camera with a time-lapse shutter release to document the event. 2 of the events were staged, so the candlelit dinner and the family meal were staged things. And 2 were things that I was attending as a guest, and that would be Meredith's 31st birthday and Wake Vicky, which is upcoming. I use the time-lapse shutter release because the random nature of collecting data takes decision-making away from me. I don't have to think about what images I'm going to see. The event can just play out in its natural way. I like the element of surprise when I'm viewing the images after the event, and in particular, I'm interested in the element of surveillance. So I've been investigating how the camera and surveillance carry a weight of authority and truth. It's supposed to be a dispassionate and technological gaze, but I'm wary of the gaze, and I want my art practice to question the camera's authority. So here I'm using the camera as the silent witness, the observer, to capture the performed behaviors. I want to freeze the subjects in time in order to study, reinterpret, and reimagine the outcomes of ritual. So in order to subvert the authority of the camera, I'm reinterpreting and reimagining the photographic source material in order to bring to light some underlying current of behavior or emotion that's not captured. So something's missing from all of those images that I collect, and that's what I want to bring back through the artwork. The images are reconstructed in modes that show my hand: painting, drawing, and collage. So the next body of work is called Wake Vicky, and I think that it demonstrates well this idea of reinterpreting the images and through the artist's hand trying to assign new meaning to them. Wake Vicky was a documentation of a house party that was held in honor of the passing of a young woman, my friend, Victoria Banner. What I had done was set up a stationary time-lapse camera behind the food. So this is the food's eye view, if you will. It was a potluck dinner, and people were contributing to the food. And of course, the party ebbs and flows around the food as it normally does. This image I'm pulling apart in particular. It's one that I really love. It has that density of the images of merrymaking on its own. And it also really shows how, although this was such a somber occasion for a party, the ritual of the wake is about celebration. And that's what happened. It was a celebration. And I felt such a disconnect between the behavior of the guests and why we were there, what we were marking. So in my way, I was trying to bring back a sense of gravity to the images. And in this watercolor study, I was looking at that image and thinking about absence and making things more ghostly. Then I started looking at all these images and thinking about how there were so many of them where there was the embrace, and how the embrace is something that happens when we're grieving and we want to comfort one another, and it's also something that happens when we're so excited to see one another. So it's a gesture that has multiple meanings. I worked through so many different iterations of this, and nothing seemed to be the right thing. Over 2 years, this project went on. Other projects were happening simultaneously, but I could never really figure out how to make the party what I thought it was. And so when the opportunity came up to have a show through Colin Zip and the One Night Stand shows that he does, so a one-night pop-up, I decided that what I would do would be to reinstall the shelving in my studio, and on one side show all of the work that I tried over the course of the 2 years that I thought failed, and all of the work that really showed the party and really showed the exuberance of the guests. So this is the side that includes photographs, it includes painted studies, it includes drawings, and it also includes photographs of the work that I thought failed. So thinking about the authority of the camera and the distancing of the gaze, I wanted to re-photograph those works and then put in photographs of the work instead of the work itself. On the other side, I decided that what I would do would be to isolate figures from those crowded scenes. And in taking away the crowd, perhaps there would be some of that gravity, and there would be a way to convey the sense of loneliness and grief and loss that the people were feeling. I created the images on this dark blue paper in graphite, and what happened was that a negative image appeared. And when light hit it, certain parts of the image would be illuminated and certain parts of the image would be in darkness. So the images were always changing depending on where you were looking at them, and again, it made it rather ghostly. So this is my collection of portraits of our community at a time of grieving and remembrance. So here's Becky and Zenon. So this work, this is actually the last work that I wanted to show you guys leading up to talking about Cafeteria, and it seems like a radical jump in subject matter, or at least with the gravity of it all. But actually this work created the first moment where I showed a lot of the private things that I did in my studio in a public way. And in this work, showing the private studio work was also a way of me revealing something that was private publicly, so mirroring the idea of the private grieving and the public exuberance. It did crack open something for me that allowed the idea of having an entire show of unfinished and unresolved works be okay and interesting and exciting for me as an artist, and it truly has been, so I'm looking forward to having a conversation about that next.